Okay, I think we can start. Is that okay, Prishka? Is that okay? Perfect. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are joining from. My name is Annalisa. I'm a social worker by background. I have working experience at national level in my home country. I'm from Italy, and more recently I moved to Geneva, where I'm working with international organization. But here, I'm here in my role as volunteer for the International Federation of Social Workers, and I contributed to the development of this course. So it's really a pleasure to co-moderate this session with Prishka. Before we start, just a few housekeeping information. We have interpretation available, so you can, the session will be held in English, but in case you want to follow the session in Spanish, you just have to click on the button interpretation and select Spanish. Second information, the session will be recorded and will be made available on the IFSW YouTube channel. I think that the recordings of the two previous sessions has already been uploaded on the YouTube channel. And then this one will be made available soon. And also this session is streamed live on the YouTube channel for those who are not able to join on Zoom. That's it from housekeeping information. I just quickly move on the content. We already had two sessions. The first one that provided us with a broad understanding of the care economy, care systems, and how social workers interact and participate in care systems and in the care economy. In session 2, last week, we explored the human rights dimension of care and support, and we both looked at the perspective of those receiving care and those providing care. And we learned a very important element of the right to care and support, which is the right to self-care for everyone, and of course also for care workers and social workers, which is so important for the well-being of social workers. And this leads us to the topic of today's session, which is on working conditions of care workers, including, of course, social workers. We will have 4 presentations from 5 keynote speakers. And at the end of the session, we will hold a roundtable discussion where you will be able to ask a question or to raise issues. And in the meantime, please feel free to use the chat to ask your questions, to bring into the discussion your inputs. We will try to collect all of them and we will use them for the roundtable discussion. Before we move on, I think, Prishka, are we gonna share now the link to the questionnaire from Bath University in the chat or later?
Okay, yes. So there we have some news. We got some questions from Bath Universities, and I've added a few questions, and they all are made to collect some information from you, dear colleagues, who attend this course. So in the chat, you'll find now a link to a Google form, and you're cordially invited to fill in this questionnaire. And at the end of this speeches, we will show the results and see what we could collect from or in here. Thank you so much. So please open the chat, follow the link, and fill in the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Prishka. In the meantime, we have a very short time, so I'll introduce you our first speaker. So we move on with the presentations, but please, it's very important for you to fill in the questionnaire, so don't forget. to enter the link and fill in the questionnaire. So I'll introduce our first speaker, Narmeen Mohammad. Narmeen is a technical officer of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in Geneva, and she also contributed to the development of this course. So I take the advantage of this moment to thank you, Narmeen, for your contribution from myself and on behalf of IFSW for your inputs and for helping us in shaping this program. In this presentation, Narmeen will guide us in understanding the right to work and the right to social security for social workers. So Narmeen, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Annalisa. Hi, everyone. A pleasure to be here. As Annalisa mentioned, I am a human rights officer and I work with the UN Human Rights Office based in Geneva. So I will share my screen. Can anyone see now? Annalisa, is it good to go?
No, we don't see your screen
okay.
yet.
Sorry.
No worries.
I'm just trying. Okay. Yes, share screen. Okay, got share.
Okay,
that looks
now
good.
it's there. Yeah, we can see.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks. So for today's session, I will focus on the rights of social workers in the context of the right to work and social security. As we all know, social workers, like any other profession.
Sorry, Narmeen, can you go full screen?
Yes.
Thanks.
Perfect. So as we all know, social workers, like any other profession, they do have and must enjoy the human rights. And when we speak about the human rights, where this human rights set come from? Today, I will be guiding you through the International Human Rights Framework. And this includes international human rights treaties and conventions, and also the international labor standards, which also most of which are legally binding globally. So for this session, I will focus on the international human rights laws and instruments, and I will guide you into the key rights. So if we can see here, so the key human rights with regard to the right to work and social security for social workers, we will see the right to work, the right to just and favorable conditions of work, the trade unions' rights, the freedom of association, freedom of peaceful assembly, and also freedom of speech, and the right to social security. All of these rights have been mentioned and enshrined in most of the international human rights instruments and conventions. And I had to, for today's session, I'm focusing on three key instruments, which we call them the International Bill of Rights. We have the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, which was the first document that clearly set out the fundamental human rights and the importance of being universally protected. And then we have the two conventions. The first one, the International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which is mentioned the different sets of economic and social rights, including the right to work and the right to social security, trade union rights, and also the right to education, the right to health, among other rights. And then we have the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, which sets out different sort of civil and political rights, including the freedom of association, the freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of speech, among other rights. Let's start with the first important right, which is the right to work. When we speak about the right to work, what are the key elements that we look into? So the Article 7 of the International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, it's mentioned that everyone should enjoy and has a right to make a living and to freely choose or accept the work or any sort of an employment, which implies that no one should be subjected to forced labor or child labor. And no one has a right to actually fire someone unfairly. and also the access to decent work, which implies that a decent work that can allow the person to make a living and also to enjoy the other fundamental human rights, and also the equal opportunity to access work, ensuring that everyone can have an equal access to opportunity, which also takes us to a key determinant right, which is the right to education. How we can ensure the right to everyone to access to compulsory and free education in the primary school, but also the secondary school, including the right to vocational training, ongoing vocational training, which can enable the person to have access to a productive and full sort of an employment. So this is the first right, which is the right to work. And then we have the second right, which is the right to just and favorable conditions of work. And this is, it's been explicitly mentioned in Article 7 of the International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. And when we speak about the favorable, just and favorable conditions of work, we always need to look into 4 key elements. The first one is the remuneration, which element that we will need to look into, the occupational safety and health, and the equal opportunity for promotion, and the rest leisure, working hours, and paid and paid holidays. When we speak about the remuneration, this need to goes beyond the restricted notion of wages and salaries. We need to take in mind that the direct or indirect allowance, either in cash or in kind, which is supposed to be provided by the employer, and it has to be on a fair and reasonable amount. We also need to have in mind also the idea of fair wages. It's very important that when we speak about fair wages, it has to reflect a number of factors, which goes beyond the output of work. It requires an assessment of fairness that takes into consideration the responsibilities of the worker, the level and scale of education required for the work in itself, and different other factors, the hardship as well, which the employees might also face or subject to. So it has to be a set of standard based on a fairness criteria that we will need to take into place. The third key element to the remuneration as well, which is ensuring having a minimum wage. And this is supposed to be a standard, and it needs to be applied systematically to all workers, especially those who are actually living in a precarious conditions and difficult conditions. It shouldn't be reduced based on individual contracts or collective agreement. It has to be reviewed regularly as well and adjusted. It depends on the as well, like the if there's an inflation in a specific country, we always need to make sure that the minimum wage takes different considerations on the ground at the country level. The fourth one is we need to ensure that the remuneration consider having a decent living for workers and their families, ensuring that they can be able to have access to adequate standard of living, including housing, for example, adequate food and access to different sort of commodities and goods, access to healthcare system, and access also to education, among other rights. So when we speak about the remuneration, we need to have in mind the fair wages and also the minimum wage, and ensuring that the remuneration can allow people to access to a decent living for them and for their families. The 4 also key element, which is having a sort of an equal pay for work of equal value without any sort of discrimination based on any ground, either race, ethnicity, nationality, or migration, or health status, disability, age, or sexual orientation, or gender identity, or any other grounds. So this is for the first element. And when we look into the occupational safety and health, we also need to ensure that the employers prevent any sort of occupational accident or diseases. So the employer has the main responsibility, but also the state has a responsibility to take all measures in place, either through adopting necessary measures through legislation framework or policy framework, or different regulations to ensure that preventing any sort of occupational accident and diseases, and ensure that employers also comply with the labor legislations and the labor inspections. The third one, which is making sure that there is also an equal opportunity for promotion at different levels. So everyone need to, without any discrimination, have an equal opportunity to promotion. And again, here also the importance of having the right to education and right to receive an ongoing vocational trainings to ensure that anyone has an equal access to opportunities for promotion is also very important. The fourth element, which is the employer's right to rest, leisure, and this is, of course, having at more than 24, which is 2 days, hours in the week for rest, having paid annual leaves as well. The working hours, it should be 8 hours a day and 40 hours per week and more than this. Any overtime needs to be also paid, and also his right or her right to a paid holidays and access to paid holidays. So this is the element of the working conditions, or on the right to just and favorable conditions at work. The third right, also the trade unions right, and this has been mentioned in the International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Anyone has a right to form and join trade unions of his and her choice, and also the right to establish national federation or confederation, and the right to form or join international trade unions organization, and also the right to function freely. And as we all know, that trade unions are the voices for workers. They're the one advance the rights of workers. So they have to function freely. And we will speak again more about the specific also freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and freedom of opinion and expression. They also have the right to strike in accordance with the laws of the country. And this right, it shouldn't be restricted to any sort of lawful restrictions on the exercise of these rights by members, for example, of the armed forces or police or any administration of the state. We also have the right to freedom of associations. And this has been mentioned in the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. Everyone has a right to form to freedom of associations, including forming or joining a trade unions. And this is the general rule, and it shouldn't be restricted. So no restriction can actually be placed on this regard, of course, except to those allowed by law, giving the necessity in a democratic society for reasons of national security, public safety, or public order or health, like we have seen, for example, during the COVID-19, where there was specific measures taken in place, and including the exercise of the freedom of association and assembly. So this is the right of the freedom of association. This goes without saying, also applied to the right of peaceful assembly. Anyone has a right to the peaceful assembly. And here the duty bearers or the states has the obligation to respect and protect and facilitate a peaceful assembly, including those organized as well by the trade unions. We also have the right to freedoms of opinion and expression. This also has been mentioned in the Article 19 of the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights. Anyone has a right to hold opinion without any interference, and no exceptional restriction as well. The states and different actors need to protect all forms and nature of opinion. Also, there is a prohibition of any criminalization to holding an opinion. And there's also special duties and responsibilities for the state to ensure that they're respecting the freedom of opinion, and also protecting the freedom of opinion from any different third party, and also fulfilling through the legislation and policies and different enforcement mechanism to ensure that everyone can exercise the freedom of opinion and expression. We have as well the right to social security. And this has also been explicitly mentioned in Article 9 and 10 of the International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The first key element is the right to access and maintain benefits of social protection. And this is from any lack of work-related income and affordable access to healthcare and insufficient family support. And what do we mean by the social security is how we can provide access to healthcare and income security to people whenever they encounter social risk or contingencies. The social risks and contingencies throughout their life cycle. We have the General Comment 19, which is provided more interpretation to the types of social risk and contingencies that we can speak about. As you can see here, we have the healthcare, sickness and times of sickness, old age, and times of unemployment, employment injury, and of course, maternity, disability, and survivors and orphans. So the Social Security need to ensure that provide access to all sort of benefits, including healthcare and income security through the all social risk and through their life cycle. The key also aim from the right to social security is we ensure that its redistributive character, it plays a very key role to reduce poverty and inequality, but also it plays a very key role to advance the enjoyment of other human rights. For example, the right to health by ensuring a universal access to health coverage, housing, for example, and other human rights, right to education as well. So it plays a key role to reduce poverty and inequality, but also enjoying the other sets of human rights. So the types of social security schemes. So we have the social insurance schemes, the contributory one, which can be contributing through the financed general taxation, for example, of the country. We have the non-contributory one, which is beyond the general taxation. And then we have other forms, which is sometimes through the pensions, through the private sector, for example, run schemes, the corporates and others. So in terms of, we have the General Comment 19, which is illustrated more specifically in terms of when we look into the right to social security, what aspects and elements we will need to look in mind. And then the first element is the availability, which we ensure that the social security schemes are available to all categories of people and populations through the social risks or contingencies through their life cycle. There is also need to be available in the coverage as well, either contributory, non-contributory, and other forms. It's need to be accessible, physically accessible in terms of the locations of these social security systems across the country and across the different regions. It also need to be economically accessible, and here we speak about the affordability, where everyone can afford the social security schemes, the contributory one, and also the contributory one can be accessible to anyone, including those who are in vulnerable or marginalized situations. The eligibility criteria can be also accessible to anyone, and also the adequacy. So here the responsibilities, again, the states should take an effective measures and periodically revise when necessary these social protection system to ensure that they're responsive to anyone regardless of their needs. And they have also a key responsibility toward maximizing their available resources to ensure that the right to social security are realized at the national level through the legislation, through the policies, the systems are comprehensive and address the needs of all people. And again, state must not deny social security coverage arbitrarily or unreasonably. So this takes us to the end of the presentation. So thanks, over.
Thanks. Narmeen, for your presentation. I saw popping in the chat very interesting questions. So we will come back to you for sure at the end during the roundtable discussion. But let me, let's mention that these rights that you very clearly illustrated, they need to find realization in the world of work. And for this reason, we invited the International Labour Organization to help us to understand what are the conventions, the labor conventions, and the mechanisms in place to help governments, workers, and employers to give realization to these rights. And again, what are the mechanisms that can be put in place to improve working conditions for care workers and social workers. So I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Maren Hofe. She's technical officer in the sectoral policies department at the ILO in Geneva. And Maren is the specialist for the health sector. I had the opportunity to work with Maren during my time at the ILO, so it's really a pleasure to introduce you, Maren, and to give you the floor for your presentation. Just one thing, I saw one hand up. Just hold your question for the roundtable. We will come back and we'll give you to the audience the floor to ask your question. So yeah. Thanks, and Maren, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Annalisa, for the really kind introduction. And thank you also very much for inviting me to this session. It's a great pleasure to be here with you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I saw we have participants joining from all around the world, and it's fantastic to see also the exchange already in the chat. I hope you can see my presentation in presentation mode.
Yes. We can.
Wonderful.
Very well.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And thank you also very much to Narmeen for the very interesting presentation. And as you already mentioned, labor rights are human rights. And they are important. And I would like to take the next couple of minutes to dive a little bit deeper into what these labor rights, what the international labor standards actually are, how are they developed, what is the role and the voice of workers and employers in developing them, but also in implementing them, and maybe spark a little bit of interest in also engaging in this process, not only at international, but also at national and local level. So let's start with what are international labor standards. International labor standards are actually legal binding instruments drawn up by the ILO's constituents. And as I mentioned before, it's not only the governments, but the ILO works in a tripartite structure. So that means it is governments, employers, and workers who have an equal say and an equal voice in developing these standards. And international labor standards lay down principles and rights at work. Some of them have already been mentioned in the presentation before. These instruments and the international labor standards can actually take different forms. They can either take the form of a convention, which are legally binding international treaties that can be ratified by a member state, or they can be recommendations, which are non-binding guidelines or sort of give a little bit more, hands-on experience and guidance to specific aspects. So while the convention sort of set out basic principles to be implemented by ratifying countries, the recommendations that accompany conventions, or some of them, provide really this guidance on how to do it. But we also have recommendations that are autonomous and that they are not bound by a convention. At the moment, the ILO has 190 conventions, 6 protocols. Protocols are also legally binding instruments, and 208 non-binding recommendations. How are they developed? How is it decided that an international labor standard is needed? And, how does that actually come to life? It starts with our constituents noticing that there is a growing concern, a growing labor concern. That can be any topic that is internationally recognized as being of concern. And then they agree, and it's been put on the agenda for the International Labour Conference. And then that kicks off a 2-year, 2-stage process that involves the development and negotiations around a draft international standard. Involves a lot of report writing, a lot of questionnaire, a lot of data gathering, a lot of negotiations back and forth. But it is important to know that in all of this development, governments, employers, and workers have an equal voice and provide inputs through various different means into the development and definement and refinement of these standards. So for example, I can give you an example. At the moment, at the International Labour Conference this year, we have 2 standard setting discussions. One is the second discussion, which hopefully lead to an adoption of a standard on protection against biological hazards. And we have a first discussion on a potential standard setting on decent work in the platform economy. So these are currently topics that are being discussed. Now, once a draft standard is refined and adopted, that means adoption means by a 2/3 majority, which we consider reflecting a broad international consensus. Now, the interesting part is that once such an international labor standard is adopted, member states are required to submit the convention or the protocol to their national authorities for consideration of ratification. So every government sees the convention and then decides if it is going for ratification or not. International labor standards are designed to promote opportunities for all individuals to obtain decent and productive work under conditions of freedom, equity, security, and dignity. They cover a whole range of topics. A lot of that has already been mentioned before. From freedom of association, occupational safety and health, violence and harassment, maternity protection, migration, employment promotion, forced labor, child labor, working time, wages, you name it. We have a lot of topics covered. We also have some conventions that cover specific categories of workers. For example, the Nursing Personnel Convention or the Domestic Worker Convention and others. If you want to have, if you're interested in understanding or looking into what conventions and recommendations exist, I would invite you to look at the Normlex website of the ILO, where you can find all the different conventions, the text of the conventions in different languages. But you can also see which countries have ratified which conventions. So if you want to know what your country that you're based in, which conventions they ratified, please have a look at this website. Out of these labor rights, we do have some that we consider fundamental principles and rights at work. And they are sort of a set of core labor rights that are considered essential for fair and just work environments. So back in 1998, our member states adopted a declaration in where they committed to respect and promote these principles. They were initially 4 principles. Now they are 5 principles, regardless of whether or not they have ratified the relevant conventions. So basically what happened, I identified these 4 areas, and then there are conventions linked to these principles and rights at work. But no matter what, the member states agreed that these principles have to be adhered to, irrespective of the ratification of the convention. And these 4 areas, the initial ones were freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining, the abolition of forced and compulsory labor, the abolition of child labor, the elimination of discrimination in employment and occupation. And newly, they have decided to put a healthy and safe work environment as a fundamental principle and right at work. And although all of them are very important, I think is particularly also the right, the fundamental principle and right to a health and safe work environment is particularly of interest for social workers, also considering that a lot of the services provided are often in the community, in households, and how to ensure protection and safety of workers that are out in the community, that are out in households and in facilities. So while the other conventions may focus on specific topics, these fundamental principles and rights at work, they are universal, they are mandatory, and they actually form the cornerstone of labor rights worldwide. And you've seen that they are also reflected in the human rights presentation that were just provided. And they ensure that no worker is actually denied a basic right, regardless of the specific legal or policy frameworks in their country. So this is really universal. One thing that I would like to draw your attention to is that the ILO has a quite unique supervisory mechanism on looking or monitoring how these conventions are implemented at national level, at state level. We do have what we call the regular supervision. That means that countries who have ratified an ILO convention are required, I think every 3 years, to report, to draft a report on how the convention is implemented. And for conventions that they have not ratified, they have to send this report every 6 years. And the report is actually examined by the Committee of Experts, which is an independent body composed of 20 high-level, top-notch labor law experts and international experts that then actually review the reports, and in case there are any concerns, they actually make observations or direct requests to the governments to change here and there. In addition to that, we also have what is called special procedures that include complaint mechanisms that can be made by member states, governing body, or delegates, or representation, which can be filed by employers or workers' organization when they feel that there is a violation or that the member state is violating a convention. And then depending on what, if it's a complaint or representation, different mechanisms are kicking in to actually investigate the case and then come up with the way forward. For example, in case of a complaint, the Commission of Inquiry will make a recommendation, and if the country or the member state is not following, then this can be taken to the International Court of Justice. We have a special procedure as well in case there are complaints regarding the violation of freedom of association. So this complaint mechanism is quite complex. This is just a small summary, but if you're interested in learning more on how that works and how you can, how complaints are filed, please have a look at our ILO Supervisory System website. So in a nutshell, international labor standards promote fundamental rights, decent work, and fair conditions. So basically, that's the reason why we have paid leave, access to social protection, working time, etc. They are supported by a strong supervisory mechanism that ensures compliance and accountability. And they are rooted in a strong tripartite structure, which gives an equal voice to workers, to employers, and governments. So it's really, truly developed in dialogue and through consensus building. And I think that dialogue and that consensus building, the social dialogue, is really essential, not only at international level, but it is also essential at national and at workplace level to actually really implement those standards and to devise mechanisms and strategies and policies that are responsive to the workplace realities aligned with the broader standards. So what we saw and what our experience shows, not only at international level, but also in all other levels, is that addressing the challenges can only be done jointly. And social dialogue is key. But what do we mean by social dialogue? So basically, social dialogue includes all types of negotiations, of consultations, but also exchange of information. And that can be between governments, employers, and workers, sort of, in the tripartite group, but it can also be bipartite, for example, at facility level between the employers and the workers. And this form of engagement, of dialogue, of bringing up concerns or joint solutions is actually essential to ensure that policies and procedures really reflect the needs of the workplace and that they respect the workers' rights and conditions. So it's really this dialogue that gives effect and life to these labor standards at all levels. So now bringing this a little bit back to, what is this whole, the rights, the labor standards, what does that mean in real life? How can you use them? How can you, engage in these, in designing workplace policies and social dialogue? Well, I think first of all, it is very important that you know and that you understand your rights. Oftentimes there is a lack of awareness. There is uncertainty of what rights there are, and let's be fair, legal texts are very difficult. So know your rights, understand your rights, look if there are any awareness raising campaigns, participate in employers and workers organizations, join a trade union, join associations, engage in social dialogue, and then please actively contribute and monitor labor standards through social dialogue, through engagement with each other. I would like to stop here. I would like to encourage you to actively engage, to look where you have opportunities to raise concerns, to actively and jointly work together to address all the challenges that social and care workers are facing in the current care and support system. And I stop here, and Annalisa, I hand back over to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Maren, for your very clear presentation. I saw many questions again, so we will come back to you later for sure with all these questions from the audience. But now let me hand over to Priska, who will introduce you our next speakers.
Thank you, Annalisa.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so it's so interesting to have this view from ILO now. We have the opportunity to see some results of a research that has been made by Bath University, and here we have Paula and Jermaine who present the result of the study they've made. If you want to have more information about your work and the study, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Priska. I'm just going to do the full screen here. Okay. So hello, everybody. I'm Paula McFadden. I'm a professor in social work at Ulster University. So I work closely with Jermaine, who has led on the study here around global working conditions for social workers, with David Jones and Rory Truell from the International Federation of Social Work. So I'm just going to take you through a few slides in the background and context, and then Jermaine is going to take you through the study results, the headlines over 3 different comparisons of international analysis of working conditions for social work. So why are we even looking at this? We know that mental health and stress in social work is prolific. We know that it is not just, at local, national, at UK level, but across other multiple countries. We know this from the literature that we have both studied, and we also know it from the direct research that we have done. Now that impacts, stress at work impacts on the social worker's ability to perform well, to do a good job. It affects their health and well-being, but it also affects the service users that are dependent on a stable workforce and consistent relationships with social workers. So this slide here just shows you some of the, levels of sickness absence that has been, reported. 10% of all absence is reported around sick and stress leave, and it costs 20 billion per year for that level of absence. So there's an economic imperative to try and support social workers, but also a moral one in relation to the service that we need to deliver to those that needs them. So high workloads is a really critical point. Other work I'm involved in is looking at safe staffing levels in social work. So that is safe workloads. So workloads within human capacity for social workers, and governments to have workforce planning for social work that meets societal needs. So yeah, in social work, the highest sickness absence records have been recorded in social work, and that's a government statistic from 2023. So well, how does this actually look? How does it play out? And how does stress affect health? So there's lots of research that has evidenced that prolonged stress causes health problems, and not just mental health problems, also cardiovascular and physical health. Using like biotechnology, recent research by Austin Griffiths in Kentucky and the United States has shown, the direct impact between stress on child protection social workers there, according to impact on cardiovascular disease, sleep quality, and depression and anxiety. So we know that, there's lots of health problems and behavioral manifestations then that would come with high levels of stress over a long period of time. So the purpose of this study, so the International Federation of Social Work, led by David Jones as the chair of this work, and including Rory Truell, led by Jermaine in terms of the actual study design and analysis. We partnered together to look at social work working conditions with a study on alternate years, looking at working conditions across multiple countries. So surveys in multiple languages have collected data now since I think it was 2019 or 2020. So we're able to have a look at the unique insights into global working conditions for social workers across different countries, and able to break them down by country, region, and group. And ultimately, it's to aim to argue for and lobby for the improvement of working environment for social workers, particularly because the service users they're the most vulnerable in society, and they need a robust workforce. So the research questions are, this was to do like an objective academic piece of work on the impact of working conditions, and how they compare across countries, which conditions in particular most influence mental health and well-being, and how to improve psychological well-being for social workers worldwide. So it ties into the previous two presentations we've just listened to, and Jermaine now is going to take us through the headline results from the global study. Jermaine?
Thank you, Paula, and nice to be here, everybody. So as Paula says, my name is Jermaine Valley. I'm a professor and Pro-Vice-Chancellor at Buckinghamshire New University. I was at BASPA until about a year ago. And the idea behind this project started probably 8 years ago in research I've been doing with the British Association of Social Work. And we identified that in the UK, being a social worker can be tough. It can be hard. It can be emotionally hard. It can be hard in terms of workload and all of those things that Paul has outlined. And so speaking with David Jones and Rory Truell, we decided to do a similar thing, but at a kind of at a global level. So over the last 6 years, since 2019, every 2 years, we've run this survey. And we've run it alongside colleagues from across the world. So we have partners in New Zealand and Australia and in Latvia, across Europe and North America. And as Paula says, the idea is to look at what working conditions are like for social workers. Now, I think we all know that it's difficult, but I also think that me not being a social worker, and I always apologize for not being a social worker and not quite being able to understand everything that you do on a daily basis. But me not being a social worker and being objective actually provides some strength to our arguments. So globally, we did this survey. In essence, we looked at working conditions and we looked at well-being in social workers across 6 or 7 years across the world. And what we found in our kind of analysis from this last year is that in many groups, in many areas, you think about demands, which are the amount of workload that social workers have. the amount of support that social workers receive from their managers and from their peers, how they understand their role within the sector, and how change is communicated within the sector, are all slightly better than previous years. Now, there are not significant differences, so we can't necessarily argue that these differences are not just due to general noise in the system, but we are seeing some improvements across time. And I think the kind of pandemic effect is actually quite real in this. And then we see worse scoring on control. So control is really important. It's the amount of autonomy that social workers have to go about doing their jobs, and we saw scoring worse there. We then broke down the results, next slide please, Paula, into 5 different regions, the 5 IFSW regions. And I'm going to speak very quickly through the results for those 5 regions across Africa, Asia, etc. So across African social workers, we had probably only a few hundred responses across in each time that we did this survey across all 3 runs. But basically, we found last year that the findings were the working conditions were more improved in 2024 than they were in 2021, 22, and 2019. So some improvements there. In Asia, the results are more mixed. So managerial support, peer support, relationships, and role were all better than the previous runs, than the previous sets of years. And both demand, so workload and control, which is autonomy, are better than in 2019, but slightly worse than 2022, with change, as we would expect, consistently worse. Thank you, Paula. Europe, this is where we have our most respondents. So we have thousands of respondents across Europe, across all 3 time frames. And again, the findings are different in Europe. So, for example, peer support, which is so vital to surviving in social work, was better in 2024 than it was in the previous 2 runs of this survey, which I think is a positive finding. And both demands and managerial support were better than in 2022, but worse in 2019. But what we're finding is that control, autonomy, relationships, which is how well you get on with the people around you, understanding of role, and how change is communicated, were each worse in Europe. So a bit of a mixed bag, actually. And then finally, before handing back, is we look at Latin America and North America. So managerial support, peer support, change, again, significantly better, or well, better than previous cohorts, and significantly so in some areas. With demands, change, and role worse than 2019, and control worse than the previous 2 cohorts. And finally, as we can see on that last slide, on that last part of the slide, control, managerial support, peer support, relationships, all better than 2019, but worse than 2022 in North America, and role and change worse now than they had been before. So, Paula, did you want me to talk to these?
Yeah, if you would talk to those.
Okay, so I think it's without doubt that social work is a really difficult and stressful profession across the world, and those working conditions, which are so important to not just the individual health of the social worker, but actually they're so important to the outcomes for the people that the social workers are working with and for, those service users, we often call them in the UK. And to see working conditions generally relatively poor is difficult. However, as it says there, these are our kind of initial analyses. We do need to look more at some at the stats, and we also need to reflect on and contextualize the results, because we're very aware that the situation is different in different parts of the world. And one of the reasons we might be seeing some of these differences is because the cohorts are relatively small in some regions, some are in 2 or 3 of those regions. And we haven't seen the impact of aid cuts from the US, the UK, and elsewhere. And we are assuming that actually these are going to have significant impacts on social workforce and their work because of the impact that it has on some of the most vulnerable. The last thing just to reflect on is that despite, I talk very negatively about the work, not the work, about the situation that social workers find themselves in. But the one thing that we hear year after year is how engaged, how much social workers absolutely love their job and how much they realize and understand how much they make a difference. So despite all the negativity, actually we see lots and lots of positives in social work as well. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jermaine.
Thank you both so much. There's already a question in the chat about the report, and I think afterwards we'll focus on that one and just give an answer on how that was in Africa. But some of your results have been focusing also in Latin America, and here we have Kenya Batista. Kenya is the president of the region in Latin America for IFSW. She is also president of the Panamanian Social Work Association, and she's speaking Spanish. And we have Lucia, who translates to English, and that makes you all who want to have the translation to English, please press the button at the bottom line where you see Dolmetscher. Go there and press English, otherwise you won't hear anything. So just make sure that you go on this translation, interpretation, and press English if you want to have English, and if you prefer Spanish, then choose Spanish there. Thank you. Kenya, the floor is yours. We listen to your information about labor conditions for social workers in Latin America.
Sí, muy buenos días desde Latinoamérica. Buenos días, noche a todos. Para nosotros es muy importante esto y sí quisiera, antes he escuchado las otras presentaciones y es importante poder que estos estudios que se están haciendo y como especialista en salud ocupacional que somos, de prevención de riesgo igual, es importante que nosotros podamos entender en su justa dimensión que desde que Bernardino Ramazzini, ¿verdad?, que fue el padre de la medicina del trabajo, que fue un médico italiano, él se enfatizaba en 4 preguntas claves, que es la que siento que nosotros debemos hacer para los estudios que tenemos que hacer sobre las condiciones laborales de los trabajadores, que estas preguntas claves son: ¿qué hacen? ¿Cómo lo hacen? ¿Y con qué lo hacen? ¿Y por qué es importante hacer esto? Porque, por ejemplo, en el caso de Latinoamérica, los trabajadores sociales son muy territoriales porque están en lugares de muy difícil acceso para llegar a para poder llegar a los lugares donde se encuentran las poblaciones con las que van a atender. Y una de las cosas que nosotros hemos discutido en los escenarios nuestros de trabajo social es que para poder que haya mejores condiciones de trabajo, precisamente la OIT nos tiene que tener en el diccionario de las profesiones o disciplinas y cuáles son sus riesgos. Lo primero que hay que identificar para nosotros y que sería un un hito histórico de que pudiéramos tener cuáles son los riesgos laborales atribuidos a los trabajadores sociales como disciplina. Porque cuando buscas en la literatura de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo, no aparece cuáles son esos riesgos de los trabajadores sociales. Para ponderar las condiciones laborales de los trabajadores sociales hay que conocer sus riesgos. Por ejemplo, a raíz de la pandemia hay otro riesgo que se le ha atribuido a los trabajadores sociales, que es el riesgo biológico, porque el riesgo biológico está en la interacción que hacen los trabajadores sociales con las personas. Están los riesgos físicos que tienen que ver con las caídas a distintos y diferentes niveles, porque los trabajadores sociales hacen visitas domiciliarias y a través de la visita domiciliaria, los trabajadores sociales tienen riesgos físicos de caídas y que en su momento le van a traer situaciones músculo-esqueléticas que pueden traer situaciones de invalidez. Por otro lado, también nosotros tenemos trabajadores sociales en riesgos, en situaciones de seguridad pública, al probablemente trabajar en situaciones con bandas, con pandillas que tienen que ir a lugares inaccesibles o estar en una situación en guerra. Todas esas situaciones hay que tomarlas en cuenta. ¿Y por qué hay que tomarlas en cuenta? Porque, por ejemplo, cuando nosotros hemos tenido que sustentar temas económicos que son parte también de la salud ocupacional, que son parte también de las condiciones laborales, que es el tema de salario. Los salarios se miden también por los riesgos que tenga una profesión. Si nosotros no clasificamos y no hacemos un estudio de cuáles son los riesgos inherentes al trabajo social, nosotros no podremos visualizar cuáles son esas condiciones que están afectando a los trabajadores sociales. Nosotros, por ejemplo, doy el ejemplo en Panamá, para poder nosotros haber luchado por una escala salarial, tuvimos que demostrar que teníamos alta incidencia de riesgo en nuestras visitas domiciliarias, en la atención con los sujetos de atención, las condiciones en las cuales trabajan los trabajadores sociales, cuáles son las condiciones mínimas. Eso es otro desafío que tenemos que hacer a nivel de la Federación Internacional de Trabajo Social. ¿Cuál es el desafío? ¿En qué condiciones físicas debe tener un trabajador social si hay una premisa fundamental que es el tema de la confidencialidad? ¿Tendrán las mejores oficinas? ¿Tendrán las mejores sillas, las mejores insumos para su trabajo? Sabemos que hay riesgos de salud mental, porque nosotros tenemos riesgos psicosociales al trabajar con las demandas tanto positivas y negativas de la población. Ese es un riesgo inherente de los trabajadores sociales, el tema de los riesgos psicosociales asociados al trabajo con las poblaciones, asociados con el estrés producto probablemente de la cantidad de personas que atendemos en el día. No es que estamos pidiendo un estándar único, pero sí se tiene que hacer el estudio dirigido a los riesgos que padecen los trabajadores sociales para saber si los trabajadores sociales en el mundo tendrán que trabajar o 6 horas diarias o tendrán que tener mejores salarios o tendrán que tener mejores condiciones físicas, porque discutíamos en una reunión anterior que muchas de las cosas que no se logran realizar con el tema de la pobreza, con el tema de algunos aspectos con los que trabajan los trabajadores sociales es precisamente porque ni los propios trabajadores sociales tienen condiciones óptimas para el trabajo con la población y adherimos un problema adicional para poder desarrollar nuestra profesión. Por eso es que una de las cosas que posibilitan poder hacer esos estudios es precisamente tener un gremio o un sindicato o una organización de trabajadores sociales que procuren la lucha de esos estudios que se realicen y solicitar ya a nivel macro, a nivel de organizaciones internacionales de trabajo social, que se le solicita a la OIT que seamos parte del diccionario de las profesiones y cuáles son los riesgos de nuestra profesión, lo cual no está. Cuando nosotros hacemos estudios de otras profesiones sí la encontramos, sin embargo del trabajador social no, y hay que ir de acuerdo a los sectores y a las áreas donde están los trabajadores sociales, los que trabajan en el área de salud, los que trabajan en el área con inmigrantes, los que trabajan en áreas de los sistemas penitenciarios, en las áreas forenses, en las áreas de la educación con niños, niñas y adolescentes, probablemente en gabinetes psicopedagógicos, en las escuelas y colegios, porque tenemos que aprender en la medida de las investigaciones a clasificar en primera instancia dónde se encuentran nuestros trabajadores sociales en el mundo, quiénes están en áreas humanitarias, quiénes están en instituciones de seguridad social, llámese vivienda, municipales, de salud, de educación, y quienes trabajan en organizaciones no gubernamentales que ofrecen como las fundaciones y demás para poder determinar esos riesgos que tienen los trabajadores sociales. ¿Y por qué es importante identificar los riesgos? Porque con la identificación de riesgos, los trabajadores pueden de alguna manera luchar por condiciones salariales, por condiciones físicas, por derechos inalienables que tenemos a través de las convenciones, que muy bien lo dijo una de las compañeras, que mantiene la OIT y que se respeta. Sobre todo las convenciones que hablan sobre el trabajo infantil, las convenciones que hablan sobre nuestros grupos originarios, porque tenemos en el área de Latinoamérica eh, una cantidad importante de trabajadores sociales que son de los grupos originarios, del trabajo que realizan en situaciones peligrosas, ¿verdad? Y para poder tener trabajo decente, primero yo necesito realizar un estudio consensuado, un estudio que me permita saber dónde estamos los trabajadores sociales, cómo lo hacemos, con qué lo hacemos, cuáles son nuestras instrumentaciones. Por ejemplo, estamos cerca de qué situaciones, de situaciones donde hay situaciones de minería, situaciones de guerra, situaciones de ambiente, de lugares donde hay climas que son muy exorbitantes, porque también eso permite saber cuáles son los equipos de protección que deben de tener los trabajadores sociales, porque, por ejemplo, los trabajadores sociales que son territoriales tendrán que utilizar casco, tendrán que utilizar gorras para no tener problemas en la piel. Los trabajadores sociales que están en situaciones de vulnerabilidad en las calles tendrán que utilizar identificación especial. Por eso es que para nosotros, como especialistas en este tema, nosotros lo que tenemos que hacer es identificar todo eso. Y eso va ligado a las leyes nacionales de los países y saber si los trabajadores sociales en ese país tienen ley profesional que los ampare, tienen códigos de ética que los amparen, tienen legalidad en sus organizaciones gremiales, sindicales o federativas o colegiadas. ¿Por qué es importante esto? Porque eso permite saber qué organización protege a los trabajadores sociales en ese país, porque tenemos el caso de Costa Rica, que tiene su colegio, que se procura hacer trabajos de salud ocupacional, de dedicarse a los trabajadores sociales para ver cuáles son sus problemas. Igual caso en Panamá, en Uruguay y en otros países que están intentando hacer esa mirada de la salud ocupacional. No podemos estar trabajando con nuestras poblaciones que sabemos que tienen muchas necesidades, que tienen muchas situaciones en las cuales nosotros debemos proyectarnos como trabajadores sociales si antes no protegemos a nuestra gente, saber dónde se ubican, qué están haciendo. No es lo mismo un trabajador social que trabaja en las fronteras con migrantes que un trabajador social que trabaja en una oficina donde se da salud, en un hospital, en una policlínica. No es lo mismo un trabajador social en el caso de muchas de nuestras áreas en Latinoamérica que trabajamos en la selva o que trabajamos en lugares donde hay poca accesibilidad a servicios higiénicos, ¿verdad? No es lo mismo. Entonces, por eso es que debemos identificar dónde están nuestros trabajadores sociales, cuáles son las áreas donde ellos están en nuestros países, en qué condiciones laboran, si hay agua, si hay probabilidad de tener una vivienda, si tienen buenos salarios, porque pareciera no calar, pero cuando tú haces salud ocupacional, el salario es parte de las condiciones laborales. Y a veces vemos el salario como un tema de derechos allá que se tiene que pelear después. No, pues los riesgos para determinar salario también se tienen que valorar cuáles son los riesgos de los trabajadores sociales. Entonces, en conclusión, hay tres aspectos.
Wrap up a bit so that we have a bit time for some few questions. Thank you.
Sí, por eso iba a concluir porque vi que Prisca ya estaba. En conclusión, hay varios elementos que nosotros tenemos que tomar en cuenta y creo que tiene que ser tomados en cuenta para un estudio de salud ocupacional completo de los trabajadores sociales a nivel del mundo. Identificar los riesgos de los trabajadores sociales y antes de identificar los riesgos, conocer en qué sectores están trabajando los trabajadores sociales y de acuerdo al sector y los riesgos de ese sector e identificar las condiciones en que las trabajan, nosotros podemos tener un estudio debidamente ligado y completo y presentárselo a la Organización Internacional del Trabajo para que seamos parte del diccionario de las profesiones y sus riesgos, para poder que nosotros entonces desde allí podamos hacer políticas para mejorar las condiciones de trabajo de los trabajadores sociales, valga la redundancia.
Thank you so much, Kenya. And one of the questions that came, I'll ask you later, is what can national associations do to support social workers in this process? But we come back later to this question and more questions before that. I'd like to share with you my screen and show the results of the questionnaire. So here we are. The first question was not really well presented, so we don't see all the details, but we have asked from what country you're from. And so we see here the winner is South Africa. So we have the most or the highest population attending this course from South Africa. So welcome this community. And then the second highest is from the Philippines. And third highest is Ghana. But you also see that we have people from Brazil, Croatia, Lebanon, Sierra Leone, Zambia. Lots of African countries are represented, but also we have someone from Thailand, Sudan, Somalia. Also, I see people from Canada, Germany. So all you most welcome here. The second question was, how are your labor conditions in general? So we have 59 people who responded to the questionnaire, and so the average rating was 6.4. What would you like to change at work? So there's a bunch of ideas, and that's like for further studies, some information that can be used, but they can be clustered in work overload should be changed or I guess reduced. Work-life balance, mental health should be more considered. I could also see a lot of comments on more support among social workers, but also more further education on specific issues in social work. There was a lot of mentioning that social workers' labor conditions shall improve, like wage and quality of supervision. But then also some areas in management and leadership want to be more proactive, want to also having better involvement in the organization, better recognition of the work they do, and then there came this Redify C190. I don't know this document, but maybe Maren knows that one. Maybe this one, I don't know. More resources and better offices. And I think also this high load of information that we have here shows that we really have a lot of themes kind of going in the direction of overload, but not having sufficient support for managing this workload. What would you like to have more at your work is that the training, as mentioned before, funding, organization, proper training, then smooth and fast adoption process, debriefing sessions, all of that goes also a bit in leadership, more trust and support, more recognition, and office space is quite often mentioned, right to freedom and inclusion, better working conditions, and flexibility to work remotely. I think that's an issue that came up more with the pandemic. So the next question is social work, a regulated profession in your country, and here a surprising amount of more than 80% said like yes, that is regulated. Here we have it. Are workloads regulated in your countries? 56% say yes, and 36% say no. And Maren, you might later say something from the ILO's perspective on these numbers. The workload, if workload is regulated, is it for both children and adult services? 80%, 82% say yes. And 17% say only for children's services. Is there policy and legislation on safe staffing workload in your country? And so that's quite mixed, like 40% say yes, and 32% say no, and 27% don't really know. And the last question is whether you're a member of a National Association of Social Workers, and here we have a majority of 56% who are a member of a national association, and bit less like a 43% are not a member of the National Association. Quite interesting to see all these results. Thank you so much for giving us some information so we can also have a discussion about these numbers. I think one of the questions that I've already given to Kenya comes a bit later, but first we might ask Narmeen and Maren what you think about these numbers and how UN agencies could support social workers in the wish of changes that we have raised here. So Narmeen and Maren, if you both could maybe take the floor. Who would like to begin? Say something.
Yeah, I can begin. Yes. Thank you very much, Priska. Well, I have to say, here in the UN Human Rights Office, we work at different sort of levels to advocate for the rights of workers, including those social workers. So we work at the country level. We work very closely with member states from different country levels in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, and all regions. We ensure that all the legislative framework and policy framework are in line with international human rights law. So we provide technical support to member states at the country level for the workers, including the social workers, making sure that their rights are being reflected in the legislation, and also in the policies, and also in all sort of mechanisms to ensure that their rights are being recognized. And I remember Kenya mentioned about the labor conditions, for example, for social workers. So we work very closely to advocate for example, improving working conditions at the ground. We also work with civil society and different stakeholders through capacity development to ensure that they are aware about their rights and they can actually claim their rights at the national level and also the regional level. We also work very closely with different stakeholders to ensure that they can be able to make use of all the mechanisms and the UN mechanism that we're having. And here I wanted to mention something important. I know one of the questions were raised is what the role of the national associations to play to advance the right of social workers. And I have to say they play a very key role in, first of all, being the voice for the social workers, being able to advocate for their rights, to ensure that there is a policy change can take place at the country level.
Narmeen, we can maybe then ask Kenya, yes, and just, it's just a short answer.
Okay, can I add one last thing? Sorry.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I just wanted to mention there is the mechanisms. We have the independent expert of the UN Human Rights Office. These are the experts that they examine either specific thematic human rights issues or violations or human rights issues at the country level. So there is a possibility where these national associations or civil society can provide, for example, specific complaints through their communications to shed light a specific issue of the right to social security, social workers. We can advocate for further. Sorry, I don't want to speak a lot. Over to you, Priska.
Lauren, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. And I fully agree with what Narmeen has said. And the ILO is also supporting at country level our constituents in implementing the regulations. I think one of the challenges, and I heard it also from Kenya and from the other speakers, is yes, we do have the laws, yes, we do have the rights, yes, we do have mechanisms in place, but how do we ensure that actually makes a difference at the workplace? How do we ensure that workers are protected, that workers not only know their rights, but that it actually has been implemented in daily life, and that it is reflected in everyday work practices? And I think there we still there's still a lot of work to do. We do have, as I said, a lot of conventions. We do have a lot of protection mechanisms, for example, the right to a safe and healthy work environment. We have the Convention on Preventing Violence and Harassment in the Workplace. But how can we engage together to ensure that these policies and practices are implemented in a very practical manner at workplace level, in facilities, but also in communities. And I think there it is very important that we work on that jointly, that we engage not only with the government, but we engage with employers, we engage with the workers, we hear their voices, we hear the realities of the workplace, and then jointly advocate.
Excuse me, but the speaker has no sound. We can't hear you.
I can hear her.
Okay.
I can hear well.
I can hear, yeah.
Okay.
I can hear also.
Yeah, maybe you
There
go
is a
out
sound, there is a sound.
Okay, so you most of you can hear me? Okay.
CPD? What CPD? CPD.
Okay, Maren, you can
Oh,
maybe wrap up.
Yes, you are so clear. Please just continue, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for confirming. And yes, I'll wrap up. So basically, I think what I wanted to say is I do recognize and we hear that there is still a lot of work to do. And I think what I would like to encourage all of you, that we all join forces and we all engage in dialogue and jointly advocating to ensure that social workers enjoy decent working conditions. I'll stop here. Back over to you, Priska.
Okay, thank you. Paula and Jermaine, if you might want to say something about the situation in Africa and how you have collected the data, and then we'll go to Kenya. Maybe you want to say something about these results that we have. Yeah.
I also couldn't hear much of the last contribution, Maren and Priska. Sorry, I don't know, Paula. Could you hear better than me?
I could hear, yes, I could hear. I suppose for me, it's the through line from human rights to, you know, the advocacy through the ILO and the evidence that's being produced via research, right, about the, you know, global context and the working conditions for social workers and across many countries. I had contributed some of those questions about safe staffing just to see if it's language that is used across countries. I suppose I was surprised with some of the results that you shared there, Priska. It's encouraging. It's actually more prevalent than I thought it was. So that's interesting because we've done like a literature review across the globe about safe staffing, and there isn't an awful lot of literature based on it. So that's interesting today. But that's all from me, Jermaine. I don't know what you might want to add.
No, I think it's fair to say, Paula, you're more of an expert in this than I am. I just report the results of studies. So you putting it into context makes much more sense to me.
So basically what we'll continue to do is to collect the data, analyze what is going on across the countries. At a local level, I am engaged with the Department of Health, looking at safe staffing workloads for social workers in older people services and in children's services, and trying to feed into workforce planning data so as that we get that right. That is something that has to happen everywhere because very often what social workers are reporting to us is that, you know, without planning, their caseloads are becoming unmanageable. They're beyond human capacity. Burnout is prolific, and they then intend to leave the profession. So that is, you know, a very unhealthy trajectory that we have to try and, you know, address and pull back on. But in order to address it, we have to understand it. So the research must continue. That's probably as much as I can say at this point.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for continuing this questionnaire and study on social workers' labor condition. Kenya, what do you see? What is the National Association's role? And please keep it short because we are already running out of time. Thank you.
Sí, nosotros creemos que el rol de las asociaciones, sindicatos y demás organizaciones que protegen a los trabajadores sociales o que luchan por los trabajadores sociales es fundamental para poder ser el camino para hacer este tipo de investigaciones y que podamos tener de los diferentes sectores digamos que el componente ideal y acercarnos más a las verdaderas condiciones laborales que tienen los trabajadores sociales, no solamente desde el punto de vista de la salud mental, sino también de sus riesgos físicos, porque tenemos muchas trabajadoras sociales en el camino que se han caído, que han quedado hospitalizadas por problemas precisamente haciendo visitas domiciliarias y también identificar todos los riesgos inherentes al trabajo social para con el apoyo de la Organización Internacional del Trabajo, que veo que hay una representante allí, podamos de una vez identificar cuáles son los riesgos inherentes al trabajador social, que no solamente está en la carga laboral de la salud mental, sino que en otras cargas que también son inherentes a la profesión.
Thank you so much, Kenya. We do have more hand raised, but we would like to end the course on time. Annalisa. I think we summarizing this by saying labor market and labor condition of social workers have a huge potential to be increased, and more research is necessary, more information, but also we have National Association as a key function, bringing together social workers' interests and needs and the really demanding work situation that Kenya mentioned, and somehow being the voice, as Narmeen and Maren have expressed, to have this social exchange, and also linking the information with research, but also the global body. So, and also IFS has an important role to raise all those voices to a global level. And so all of you who aren't a member of a national association, I encourage you to become a member, but also contribute on a national level on building up a community there, and networking with social workers and becoming a strong voice. It is everywhere seen as a really important profession that has to contribute a lot to the change that we all strive for. So this, I think, Annalisa, what do you think? Have you heard anything else that we should highlight and at the end of this session?
Yeah, thanks, Prishka. Well, I saw many comments just confirming how complex is the working situation for social workers. I saw many comments from different countries, and all our colleagues underlined EV workloads, unfair wages. So as you said, I think it's absolutely important to understand what are working conditions, but also take care of our social workers, because this is so essential if we want, and if we because we need to be allowed to take care of our communities. And if we don't take care of social workers and care workers, social workers won't really be able to provide quality services. Yeah, so I think yeah, it could be like summary.
So well said. Yeah. Thank you so much, Annalisa, for co-moderating. Thank you all speakers for being here and contributing with your really professional insights. We record these sessions and make it available so for a wider audience. And we aim to have a policy paper later on to really collect all those information and provide some information for social workers, how they can work on a national level on care and support systems. So this is the end of session 3, and next week we have the session 4, our last session, where we look more on a political level. We have the UN RIST and IFSW, Roy Truel, who was mentioned, but also national representatives from governments. And so we try to have a debate on how that can be used in a political language and what has been achieved so far. You are most welcome to join, of course, the last session with us, and then we will also explain more about how you get the certificate when you've attended all 4 sessions. Thank you all. Wish you a wonderful, good, safe week, and go ahead and do good social work, and always know that you are one of 5 million social workers, members of IFSW. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Chaito, Lucía, gracias.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye bye.
Esperamos
Bye.
que
Thank
hayamos
you so
quedado
much.
bien.
Very insightful. Thank you.
Chao.